to come today, and I know we've got a couple of business items that we need to get through because we've had, we haven't had a quorum the last two meetings, so with but we should be able to get those done pretty quickly. What, do you need a formal attendance or do you have it?
No, I'll write everyone's name down. That's fine.
All right. So the first thing is the approval. Do you want to move along?
Yeah.
Just look it up, please. Approval of the draft minutes for the January 30th, 2026 meeting. Noted with the asterisk just to mention why we're these front row. Why we are redoing a couple of those things and then the February meeting. So hopefully you've had a chance to look over the January meeting minutes that were sent out. Motion to approve the minutes. Carolyn, 3 seconds. Gina, all in favor? Okay, any abstaining the program? Okay, and then February minutes. Big thing. Carolyn, okay, second. All in favor? Thank you. Opposed, abstention? Okay. Okay, and these all go up on the county website, right?
They do. Yeah.
Yeah. So, they're there for anybody who wants to look at them. The chair and vice chair roles, talked about those in January, and mistakenly thought we had enough folks there to take the vote. So I was nominated as chair, and then Mike lead us for the vice chair. So we would appreciate a motion to formalize that, approve it. Carolyn, second. All in favor? Any opposed, abstentions? Okay, so now it's official.
Perfect.
Same with the logo. Okay, we looked at a couple of different ones that were proposed, and this one was the one that was selected, but again, we didn't have enough folks to really formalize it. So the other thing on our agenda to approve this motion. And second, all in favor? And, any abstentions? No.
One point of order. What's that? What's the green? I got the film.
Paint.
It looks like a paintbrush.
Oh, paintbrush.
Yeah.
But yes, good clarifying question.
Okay, so those pieces all done. The one that's going to take a few minutes, please, is our conflict of interest. We've all filled them out, and then they have been submitted, and then they didn't go anywhere else. So as a board, we need to know those, and we need to formalize it. And Mike's going to take us through that process. But one thing before I do that, just yesterday, I think, we had our 15th member now. We stepped down in January. It took a little while to get on that, and Elizabeth McPartland is now an official member of the group. She's out of town today, but she'll be joining us. So, and she is with Child and Family Services. We interviewed a couple folks. She was the candidate that we agreed would be the best fit for the group right now. So, okay. Mike.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I covered much of this last time, but maybe not everyone was here. We have a conflict of interest policy, of course, for the board, and the policy pretty much tracks what nonprofits do in the community anyway, which is based on New York law that was overhauled in 2014. So there's sort of a more complex procedure than there used to be before then. And like Pat said, a lot of organizations are doing this out there, but they sort of stop at the point where everyone files their conflict disclosures, but there's action that has to be taken after conflict disclosures are filed with the board. And so that's what we have to do here. And the policy lays that out in detail because the statute lays it out in detail. So if it seems that there's, multiple steps to this, and why isn't it more simple? It's because the law lays it out that way. So what we do in reviewing the conflicts, which are summarized here in the table, is that the standard in the policy that we wrote is whether any of these conflicts would affect the ability of the board member to act objectively with respect to the business of the board. And then the second part of the requirement is that the disinterested board members, the other board members, have to conclude that the arrangement between the board and the grantees that may be, in the list of the conflict relationships is fair and reasonable to the board. In other words, the implicit rationale is that the conflict relationship shouldn't affect the terms of the transaction, the grant, between the board and the grantees. That's the idea behind a conflict review. It's not that conflicts are prohibited, it's that they should be reviewed by the board, and the board should conclude that the grant arrangement, or whatever the other arrangement is fair and reasonable despite the conflicting relationship that exists on the board. And then the sort of performative aspect of all this is that the statute and our policy specifically require that we who are in the conflicted positions have to leave the room while the rest of you then vote on the conflicts. And by voting, what I mean is that you would be concluding that even though the conflict exists, that it's been disclosed, nonetheless, the whole grant arrangement we have with these grantees is fair and reasonable. That's kind of what it boils down to. So conceptually, it's simple. And in doing that, we who are the interested members are permitted to answer questions or offer explanation if the rest of the board has any questions for those of us on this list. So I'll just say that for me, most of the conflicts are in the nature of clients I've had over the years. I'm a lawyer in private practice and I do a lot of nonprofit law, so that's why there tends to be a lot of disclosures that I have to make. But I'm not on any board any longer of any of the organizations. I was on the ASI services board for a while and I stepped off that board. Yes.
So I have past relationships, but none current. Similar to you, should I disclose those then?
Yeah, actually, I thought about that. The way the statute is worded, it implies that we're talking about existing conflicts. But in our policy, we have that standard I quoted, which is that is there any relationship that would cast doubt on objectivity? So it seems to me that a past board membership is in that latter category. It's a general kind of conflict that might theoretically raise the issue of whether you could be objective. Why, is there something that wasn't on the list?
For me,
That's the nature of your disclosed
yeah,
conflict?
I have two that I was involved with
Yeah.
in the past.
Yeah.
Not currently, haven't been for some years.
Yeah. And I mean, this is an annual exercise, but just, a matter of, year in and year out, month to month. If a new conflict arises, you should just bring it up at the time. I mean, it's not that you have to wait until the next annual meeting to do the annual disclosure. Just raise it, email Pat, and then we'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting we have where we would do the same thing. So then, I'd ask whether anyone has questions for the people that are on the list. And if you don't, then the people on the list, we need to go in the hall. And then you do your little vote and then we come back in. And even though, since we talked about quorum, there's actually a gap filler in the statute. Even though there may not be a quorum remaining in the room, the rest of us count for the quorum. So it's still going to be a valid approval.
One thing that I would just touch on too, so process-wise, when we go through assigning which teams have which assignments, I believe the process historically has been, if you have conflict listed, we intentionally exclude that from the pool of applicants on that team where conflict exists. Just confirming with Colette that occurred this year.
Correct.
For some other color on this.
Yes. Yeah. Same process.
I have the list, so I'm hopeful that I attempted to do that. I think I checked. So.
I mean, I
Does
wonder
anybody
how the
find
math might work out, because even if you couldn't avoid having a conflicted grantee on the team list, individually within the team, we divvy them up anyway, so we had to be the
Mhm.
second level of
Yeah, I
protection.
think that's the level at which I was looking at it too. So,
Yeah.
so.
So any questions from the others for the people on the list before we exit?
So if something's missing, let you know.
Yeah, if something's missing, let us know. If you also, I would say, happen to receive an application that you think you may have a conflict with, let us know, as soon as possible, so that can be, reassigned.
Okay. Is there anything now?
Well, I'm an emeritus at the Birchfield.
Okay.
That should come up again.
Mhm.
That's what I was-
And I'm also a former board member of Just Buffalo.
See.
None of this should be surprising, because the people that would be interested in sitting on this board are the kind of people who would have conflicts.
I'm sorry, Pat, what
I'm
was
a
yours?
former board member
Former for
Just Buffalo, yeah.
just okay. So you are former, is your spouse still
She's
current?
former,
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there any questions for both of us?
So I'll add two for Russell Davidson,
Mhm.
Former employee at EACAB,
Okay.
and I assisted in the founding of Assembly House 150.
Aaron?
For me, former employee at Birchfield.
Okay.
And if there's no other questions, us interested directors shall step out.
Make sure. Good. Oh, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. Okay, then that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so again, this is part of the formality, but I think it's helpful to get it out there. So we just need to take a vote on whether on approving the conflict. Like, the disclosures are adequate, and then using those appropriately. Want to make that motion to accept the report and accordingly as far as excluding people from.
It's true.
So can I assume that that there would be every reasonable effort to not assign these
Yes.
to these individuals?
Yeah. And that, by having this conflict disclosure, it's acknowledged that they exist and that we will address them by not assigning anyone to their, to the entities that they have a relationship with. And I think that, that also covers us in terms of, outside
Mhm.
views on making sure that we are as objective as possible. So make that motion. I can't make motions. So,
Sure.
so
Thank you.
okay, thank you. And second,
Great.
okay, all in
Wonderful.
favor? Aye. Right, any opposed or abstentions? Okay,
Great.
good.
Thank you.
We can move on. Okay.
That's why I appreciate it.
See you.
Okay.
You get free CLV.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Okay, so that's all the business, and now Colette's gonna take
Yes.
us through the application, and, if anyone has any comments as she goes along, or things you've learned from the past, or want to bring up, feel free to do that.
Yeah, definitely feel free to stop if you have any questions, or if you remember something from last review cycle that you'd like to comment on, please do. So last night I sent out this email. Hopefully everyone received it. If you have not, please let me know. On the attachments, there are all of this year's templates for level 1, level 2, and level 3 review sheets. In the email, there's also a link to the Google Drive that has this year's applications, all of the associated attachments. These review sheets are also included on the Google Drive, but as you may recall in years past, you have to download those review sheets first to use them. Sometimes Google Drive can mess up the formatting. So I'll take you through, what really you should be looking at when you're doing the reviews. We won't go line per line through the review sheet, but again, if there's anything that you want to call out, please just raise your hand or shout out, whatever you'd like to do. So this year we have 126 applications, which last year we had 118. So there's a couple newer organizations. There's also some applicants who haven't been submitting for maybe a couple years and are now resubmitting again. So once you are in the Google Drive, which everyone should have access, if you do not, please let me know. You don't have to check that right now, but you can, let me know after the meeting. It does require that you have a compatible email address with Google Drive. So I know some people, I reached out to them who did not. So in this folder, there are all of the applications. So once you receive your assigned applications from your team leader, this is where you'll be able to find all of those. They're pretty easy to either access directly from Google Drive, or you can download the file if you would like to work off of your computer. So if you want to download it, you can click these 3 dots, click download. It does take a little bit because it's a pretty large zip file with a lot of information. Okay, so once you have that there, you can open it up. You can see that there's the application. So I'll make it nice and big. With the naming convention of, the abbreviation for the organization, application in 2027, and then all of the associated attachments. So we have, A, B, C, D. There is no E attachment. That always kind of tripped me up last year. I've been wondering where that was. F, G, H, I, and Z. And we'll go through, what each of those attachments look like and what you can find in each. Okay. So for today, we are going to look at a level 3 because it's the most involved review sheet. We're also going to be taking a look at the application for the zoo. Let me actually open up this review sheet. So you'll want to download it first. So because the zoo is a level 3 applicant, you'll be filling out a level 3 review sheet. Once it opens up for you, you'll likely have to enable editing. And then the first step is to save it as the naming convention for the application that you are reviewing. If you go through and save, it will replace the template. So the first thing to do is to save as. And this one is the zoo, so it's ZOO.review will be how you are saving .2027. And as you're going through the reviews, you can save as you wish to your computer. Once you are finalized with all of your review sheets, you can send them to me as Excel files. So wherever you want to save them, if you want to make your own, folder on your desktop or something like that, whatever works for you. So the next step would be to change the organization name. So now in the application, can open it up. Sometimes we have applicants that are, you know, informally known, you know, as a certain name, but we want to make sure that it's their official name. Okay. So as you open up the application, their legal name of the organization is the Zoological Society of Buffalo, Inc. So I want to make sure to copy that exactly. And put that into the review sheet here, and then also type your name so we know which review or which reviewer is done with each application. Okay. And this first slide has a lot of information. It is helpful to go through and make sure you understand, you know, what each of the attachments should include, which organizations or which level they are, if they're required or not. Some of the major differences between each of the application levels with regards to the attachments is that level 1 is not required to submit a strategic plan, but many of our organizations do. So if you do receive a strategic plan from a level 1 organization, it really could count as bonus points. You can put it, you know, there is an additional information section in the review sheet that you can include that. Yes.
Let me ask questions while we're going.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So when you save review sheet under the new name,
Yes.
save as, we're saving that into the Google Drive, right?
So you're not saving it into the Google Drive. You'll save it to your own
Okay,
computer.
So, and then we send it to you later.
You'll send
Okay.
it to me, and then once all of the reviews are finalized, I will upload them to the Google Drive. Yeah, go ahead.
Also, the past reviews are in the Google Drive by year, so sometimes it's helpful just to take a look.
Yeah.
Not to bias, but just to see, you know, if you have questions from the past too.
That's a good point. So as just to take a look back into the folder for 2027, I'll let you know what is included in there. So there are all of the applications. This will be complete reviews, but you don't have to put anything into this folder. That will be something that I'll put in. And then there are the template review sheets that you can download from Google Drive as well. Again, try not to work off of Google Drive. Make sure that you're downloading them. And then the prior 2026 complete reviews. So the last year's reviews are in here. I do find them really helpful to look at, just to see, you know, what did a past reviewer, you know, think about this organization. Is there a pattern, you know, that this organization is consistently missing information? It's just a good thing to look at if you have any questions on when you're going through your review. Okay, so we'll go back to the review sheet. There is a score chart on this main front page or the first tab of the review sheet. I find that we have quite a large scale. Might be helpful to pare that down at some point. Most of the reviews that I've done, this is only my second year of doing reviews. If an organization really gets, you know, everything right, they have everything submitted, I find that 7 is really, you know, the best score that you can give them. If they go above and beyond, we have 8s and 9s. But if, you know, all is said and done, an organization has a final score of 70, that's a really good score. 70 might not sound great, but it really is a good score for an organization. That means that they have everything included. And, you know, there's some subjectivity to the scoring. So we just want to make sure that we're being as consistent as possible.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you clarify something for me? I thought I heard you say that if an org, like a level 1 includes a strategic plan and they don't have to, that could give them bonus points.
Correct.
What's the could about that? Should it or should it not?
That's a good question. I would say yes. It depends on maybe the quality of the strategic plan. You know, if it's a Word document with just a couple sentences, that's a great attempt. You know, but a lot of organizations that I've seen will submit, you know, pretty extensive strategic plan. Mm-hmm. And as a level 1 organization, that would be, you know, above and beyond their expectations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. There are also some rating scale questions. So some things that you might want to think about as you're going through your review. And then we also have some examples of, we have, okay. So we have some examples of organizations who, are exemplary in a couple of different fields. So you can take a look at that on this tab. Then there's also, this is from the 2020 census, but the demographics of Erie County. So it's important, there's a lot of sections in this review sheet that, deal with, what are the populations that are served, what is their impact? So seeing if your organization can touch, these demographic groups. And then lastly, on this page, there is the programmatic impact. So we kind of have a way to measure, how impactful is your organization. If they're a national or international organization and their programming is essentially passive, maybe they have a building, there's some interpretive signage that's inside, but there's no real, programming that's happening. It would be, kind of a medium impact. If they're a local organization with similar passive programming, it would be a low impact. If they're a very active organization with lots of programming or classes, things like that, and they're, in any of the regions in Erie County, they're maybe local or national, international, then they would have a high impact. So this will come into play when we talk about the services and programs section of the application. Okay. So now, if there aren't any questions on this tab, we'll move on to financials, which I would say is, a big bulk of the application, or the review, rather. Okay, make sure I'm all the way up. Okay, so as you can see, because we put in the organization name and the reviewer name, that will be consistent throughout the review sheet. This information in the top section can mostly be found in the application itself. So you would want to make sure that you have the application open. And maybe it will be helpful if I can, it is helpful to have two screens if you have those available. Okay, let's see if this will be helpful at all. Okay, so we have the financial tab of the review sheet. The first section is asking really about this section in the application, which is funding information. So what the fiscal year start and end dates are, and you'll want to make sure that you fill those in. Any of the white cells are mainly for your use. You can put in the information directly from the application. If it's a yellow cell, that means that it feeds another part of the application, generally the results and feedback sections of the application. So you want to make sure, I find it very helpful to fill out every single cell, especially if it's, your first review. But definitely make sure that those yellow cells are filled in, because that information is very important to the results section. Okay, so this first column has all of the questions that are directly from the application. Column B are questions that you as the reviewer should pay attention to. So we want to make sure for instance, these first, two with the current fiscal year start and end dates, do the fiscal years in your financial documents all match? Make sure to consider the fiscal year change date, if applicable, while reviewing financials and programming. So if you're reviewing an application, this comes into play a lot with a lot of our nonprofits where their fiscal years don't necessarily match a calendar year. So we just want to make sure if there's any confusion about what financial documents are included. Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
And as this part, depending on how familiar or not you are with these, year end, it's like June 30th of 24, files of 23. Tax return, and so some of the year-end dates tend to get a little confusing, and copy to help if there's anything on that, since that's kind of not as well. So that's kind of our area, but that part keeping in mind, these documents might look old, but they're the newest ones they have. And the fact that you almost, it's 10.5 months, I think, often between the year end and the extended due date to file the tax return. So it is what it is. It just seems, it doesn't make sense necessarily originally, but it is within all the rules. And so you might have some older stuff like in there.
So I remember last year, one of the things that I got really just sort of confused on was application versus all of the supporting materials. So if I think I'm hearing you right, the sort of direct questions, the yellow columns are generally taken from the application. This middle column and things that take a little bit more sort of review or even, you know, thinking through are the attachment documents generally to make sure that what you're concluding or what the information gives you on the application is true and, you know, there's nothing funky. Is that the right way to look at that?
It depends. So in this first section here, all of this, you know, direct financial information, or at least with these questions, is listed directly in the application. When we get down to the sections even within this financial tab, but once you get to, say, you know, it says attachment B, this is where the majority of this information will come, is from attachment B.
And it's noted there.
Yeah, so that's, you know, on this particular tab, that's row 42. So once you go through, you know, each row and you're answering, you know, in column C, you know, maybe it's just your comments, maybe it's a direct number you know, and over here, once you keep going, if it does say attachment B, anything that's below, you know, attachment B will come from the attachment B document.
Okay, so that attachment B directly relates to what that organization has shared as supporting documents in B.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
Seems easy.
No, I get it. And I will say too, I ran through a review sheet yesterday, and a lot of what falls under attachment C questions you can also find in attachment B. So I find that B and C really do play off of each other, and if you're, you know, in the attachment C section, it might be helpful to take a look at attachment B at the same time. Which, you know, for everyone, attachment B is the organization's financial report. So depending on, let's see, there are different thresholds. Depending on the gross revenue, if an organization has under 250,000, they can do a management prepared report. If they have between 250,000 and $1 million, that means it's an independent CPA reviewed financial statement. And then if it's above $1 million, they need to have an independent CPA audited. So this is embedded in the application as well. Most of this information has already been vetted by DEP staff to make sure. We did a cursory review when all of the applications came through to make sure that everything that was submitted was correct for the organization. But of course, you know, there might be some corrections that are still needed to be made.
Just to kind of add to that, based on it came up in one of, I think, when we met separately, but with the things that have been going on at the newspaper, I think, you know, where is our responsibility, and I think it's to, you know, accept what has been given to us as long as it, you know, doesn't look like it was done on, you know, by hand, you know, by some and not signed. And so I think we're meeting due diligence on that. But if anything does look really odd or unusual, or I've seen them that have, and not in this group, but seen ones that have been done, you know, really pencil paper, hand by hand still, and have some unusual things on them. So if anything, if you have any questions like that, just feel free to bring them forward. Rather ask than anything else. And occasionally, I've also found that even with the fiscal years, just the file got uploaded, the wrong file got uploaded. So I don't think it's up you if something looks like that. So.
Yeah, that's a good point too. You'll see a lot of documents from 2024 because that is the most recent actual information that these organizations have. A lot do not have their, you know, tax filings or a lot of their financial information from 2025 yet. So if you see, documents from 2024, don't be alarmed. That just might be, their most recent version that they have. In fact, I have not seen many from 2025. So in the financial tab, some of the most important information that we want to know is the total amount of the applicant's 2025 actual expenses and the source of that information. So in the application here, for this organization, the total amount of their actual expenses is, 13 million plus. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to put it directly in this yellow cell. And then once, you can follow through and as you go through the application, fill in, the corresponding sections. But the next, important step is the amount that they're actually requesting for 2027. So this organization is requesting $2,300,000. And automatically on this section, it'll tell us what percentage of their 2025 actual expenses really is that number. So we do not want organizations to request more than 20%. If they do, we do have a process where they can complete a higher level application. Because this organization is already completing a level 3, we would want to make sure that they're within that 20%, which they are. And then the next important cell is their level of application. So this one is a level 3. And if you're ever unsure, it's right below their request is the level of funding that they're requesting. Okay. And then, just going through, there's, you can provide a narrative from their application on their prior funding use. So how, have they used the Erie County Awards in the past? That's, part of the application. And then also comparing it to the purpose of their 2027 funding. I've, received some organizations who are requesting, a much higher increase from, some of what they've received in the past. So we want to make sure that, what their justification for that funding is included in, their application. And if you have any questions on that, that's something that I'm still working through as a reviewer as well. What is a reasonable request versus, we do a couple, different things when it comes to making the recommendation. It's often based on what they've received in the past. It's received on, how much money that we have to give out in general. And then also that, 20%, making sure they're not going beyond that for their 2025 actual expenses.
Maybe I missed it, but is there something that, are there things that are just not allowed to be requested for?
Yes, that's a good question. So these are for operating costs. So generally you'll see things like salaries and wages. They can request things like utilities. They can pay rent. They can't pay like a mortgage or anything with that. I believe that, or like capital expenses. Alcohol is tricky because it is listed in the contract that it can be for, if they're doing some sort of programming or festivals or things like that, but it can't be provided to, board members. Most of what I see, in here, we've tried to vet it to make sure that it's going explicitly to operating costs, but there are definitely, some that squeeze through that it really is more of like a capital project that they're requesting for. Yeah, and I don't know if any reviewers have had, instances where they've seen that either of, having to go back. Yeah.
But they still had programming that existed within the application, but the majority of their application and the increase was for cattle.
Yeah, I had during the cursor review this year a similar instance, and I just had to make sure that they went back and revised that within their application. Okay. So now, as we're going through this is still information included in the application itself rather than any of the financial attachments. We asked them about, when their 501c3 status was received. That's in the application. Organizations need to submit a CHAR 500 document, which is included in attachment D with their tax filing. There are only select organizations who are exempt from the CHAR 500 document. Generally, those are educational institutions. And I think if they're not required to submit annually if they have, I think the threshold is $25,000. However, even those organizations are required to register. So if you have an organization who does not have a CHAR 500 document, they will disclose that in the application. If it's missing from attachment D, we've tried our best to make sure that all of that has been included. But if you do not have a CHAR 500 in attachment D, it likely was just, something that was not included. I'm thinking next year we just have the CHAR 500 included as attachment E, and then that'll kind of help with, those organizations, because I can see that, getting, forgotten. Yes. So more about the CHAR 500. We have some questions about if the organization has a surplus or deficit, which they should disclose in the application. And that's actually in their financial health section. So you'll find as you're going through the reviews too, there's some, you'll be skipping sections. There's things that you go back in the application. So if it's not sequentially in the application, don't worry. You might just have to go a little bit further in the application to find that information. New for all of the applicants, at least new for level 1, we're asking about if they have an endowment, and if they do, subsequent questions regarding that. So that was new in level 1 applications.
Colette?
Yeah.
Do we mean an endowment in the technical sense of the term? Because some people throw around that term casually just to mean, some sort of investment fund.
That's a good question. I would say, in the traditional.
The technical.
Yeah.
A real one.
Yeah.
So, which usually shows up as, well, now there's only 2 categories: restricted, but permanent. Restricted in the older language, it's usually separated out.
Mm-hmm. And then a new section here is their comptroller monitoring report. So I don't have the exact number, but a good number of our organizations have been subject to an Erie County Comptroller monitoring report. So essentially an audit by the Erie County Comptroller. They've been doing this for several years now. So that was a new question in the application. Organizations who have received an audit, that is included in the attachment. So you'll see it's called the Cultural Agency Report. So if you are assigned an application that has a cultural agency report, I suggest you take a look at it, make sure you read it. They're not too long or anything like that, but just kind of see what the suggestions were for that organization, and then embedded in the application itself. If an organization was subject to a comptroller monitoring report, they had to provide a narrative on how they responded to that audit. So that way, we're kind of covering our bases, making sure we understand who, has been, subject to those audits, but also that, they're reflecting that. There were a couple organizations that, I reached out to, and perhaps it was just personnel changes, but they just weren't aware. So it was good to make sure that, the organization is currently aware of any, reports that have been done.
And you have the link there to the site where all those reports are, just
right
in case, and there are a number of new ones.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They say, I don't know when exactly they're published, but, we'll make sure to, if any come out, during this review period, we'll make sure those are included there as well. Okay. So next, as we mentioned, once you get to this section, it'll ask questions that are included in attachment B. So you go back to the folder, you would open up attachment B. And as mentioned, this is their financial statement. So it has a lot of, a lot of information here. most of the questions that are, following in this section are, regarding, are their revenues positive? How did they compare, with years prior? So you just want to make sure that you're taking a look at these. If there's any questions with this document, I'm happy to help you out, but I also know, Pat and Matt have some extensive experience with this as well. Okay. The next section is attachment C, which is a spreadsheet that we provide. And of course, it's very small. This is a spreadsheet that we provide to the organizations for them to fill out on their with their own information. So it's a good way to compare, each year. I think with this one specifically goes back to 2024. So the prior fiscal year, the most recently completed fiscal year, which was 2025, what their current budget year is 2026, and then the next fiscal year budget, which is 2027. As for level 3, it's a more extensive spreadsheet. It's 2 pages long. Level 2s are, or actually this is 3 pages long. Level 2s are a bit shorter than that. And then level 1s are really only just a couple of lines for them to report out. So you'll see, that difference as you go through your reviews. Okay. And then another lengthy section is filling out from attachment D from their tax filing. So we accept 990Ns, which are really just that small postcard. If you have an organization, I think it's less than 60,000 in gross receipts is that threshold. So smaller organizations might only, submit a 990N. A 990EZ is a little bit longer than that. And then a full 990. I'd say most of our organizations fill out a full 990. So we'll open up attachment D. So this organization has their CHAR first. You might see the CHAR document, which we just want to make sure that this is present and that it's for a current year, which might be 2025, might be 2024 in this instance.
It shouldn't be anything less than 2024, correct?
It shouldn't be. Yeah, there's maybe there's one organization who has a document from 2023. Again, it could kind of depend on their fiscal years. 2023 would be the lowest number that we would accept, or the lowest year that we would accept. If that makes sense. And so they have their CHAR document. There isn't much, I guess more experienced reviewers, if there's anything that comes from the CHAR, really, we just want to make sure that it's there and that it's current. This is their document that, enables them to accept public funds. And then their 990, we really go line per line, and all of this information is highlighted yellow. So if an organization, it's kind of hard to see here. If an organization has, a 990, you don't have to fill out anything for the 990EZ. You don't have to fill out anything for the 990N. You just have to fill out the section for 990 and then go line per line, which luckily, most of the information you can find exactly where to find it. In part 4, line 7 is yes, and the organization provides the IRS a Schedule D. Part 2 or part 4, line 7 is no. So it's really like following directions through, the 990 document. But if you have any questions as you're going through, of course, feel free to reach out.
So all the organizations that are profitable with 990 are the ones you have to go into great detail about.
Yeah, so correct. Yeah, just based on the length of the other documents. For a 990N, there isn't much information that you would find there. So really all we worry about with those is that it was filed. For an EZ, it's much shorter. And then, a full 990 is a much longer tax document. Okay. Okay, so that really concludes, just a general overview of the financial tab. Does anyone have any questions now that you'd like to go over? Okay. And I am going to close out of these attachments. Okay, the next section is governance. So this section mainly asks questions about their bylaws, about their whistleblower policy and their conflict of interest policy. And with our level 1 organizations, in the application regarding, their governance documents, there's much less questioning for those organizations. It's part of what makes it a level 1 application versus a level 2 and 3. Level 2s and 3s, they're required to go in and tell us exactly where, each of these questions can be found, or the answers to each of these questions can be found. So if you are reviewing level 2 and 3, I do find that that's, an easy part, is knowing exactly where, the organization is pointing those out. So we want to make sure that they're current. So we want to make sure they're more recent than 2026. That would be, 10 years ago, or 2016 rather. Making sure that their, mission and purpose is stated in their bylaws, that they have membership definition and board terms, really with their quorum sizes and things like that. And then, so bylaws are attachment F. Then if we move into conflict of interest policy, this is another one that I think we see, most of the mistakes within an attachment or within the application. And that's mainly because we require that they submit the conflict of interest policy and also all of their disclosure forms for their board members and then any key persons for that organization. So if, if someone's in a decision-making role, like an executive director or something like that, we would want them to fill out a disclosure form as well for a conflict of interest policy. Additionally, so this one with the zoo, they have their policy. I know it's small. They have their policy. Lengthy one. And this organization happens to have a questionnaire. So some you'll see ask more specific questions within their disclosure form. Some just ask kind of like how ours is a blank, do you have, any conflicts and please, state them. And then you'll find, their disclosure form. So we want to make sure that the number of disclosure forms that they include in their conflict of interest policy matches the number of board members that they have, but also the number of key persons. So they should state that in their application. Which actually in their conflict of interest policy section, this states, where all of that information can be found that you can list in or, indicate in the review sheet. However, it's also helpful to go to the board of directors information. So they have, 22 board members and they have 22 conflict of interest forms. So you just want to make sure that those numbers match up, but then also in the attachment itself that those match up as well. So you have to count out, each of the 22, make sure that those are included. Okay. And this is another number that I see some discrepancies with the number of independent directors. So essentially that means people who do not have a conflict of interest are independent directors. It's okay if board members have a conflict of interest as long as it's disclosed. But a lot of the applications I'll see, they'll just say the same number of independent directors when there is a disclosed conflict, so that actually doesn't match up. They might just not understand what that definition of independent directors is.
So how do we flag that? Do we put that?
So,
Or do we not?
if I were going through a review and I saw that, I wouldn't necessarily In the application, or in the review sheet rather, I should say. I believe there's a question about independent directors. If not, you can always include it in the comments below. So once you put in your score, I should have also mentioned this with the financials as well, you'll add comments. So, whether good or bad, this will get translated into the results and feedback section. So that's something that I can take a look at. And, when I do reach out to these organizations to provide feedback, it might be something small. As long as, an organization doesn't have 0 independent directors, or, the majority are independent directors, I wouldn't, take any points off or anything like that. So that even, as a reviewer, might not be something that you reach out to the organization about. Okay. All right. Does anyone have questions about the conflict of interest policy or the disclosure forms? Because the next is the whistleblower policy, which again is, a document that you can just go through and make sure, that the essential information is included. In these yellow cells, I should mention as well, they're yes and no. Sometimes it's okay and not okay. So really just depending on the question and how it's phrased. Okay. The next section is management and planning. So this section asks mostly about their board members, making sure that their board members are, reflect the organization's mission. They reflect, competencies that would be required for their organization. They, represent maybe the demographics that they're, providing programming for. So let me actually get to go down. Yep. So board of directors information. Oh, so one of the first questions is, have they acknowledged the funding? So this can be found in attachment A. So it's the very first attachment. So making sure if they are a returning applicant that they have provided, some sort of proof that they have acknowledged Erie County for, providing that funding. Which a lot of the time, it's provided with, actually, I'm looking at this, I don't know.
Put the county seal there.
Yeah.
So there's the city of Buffalo. Oh, this is the
Is that us?
Erie County. It's not quite the seal.
That's it for the zoo.
Oh, the bicentennial. Okay. All right. Interesting. So I would say most of the organizations that submit, we don't have any issues with that. Sometimes it's a brochure, sometimes it's a flyer. Often it's, screenshots of their own website. Okay. We did remove a section from last year's review sheet that was how did they respond to feedback, because we have not provided them with feedback letters. So there'll be a conversation later, this year of how we want to provide feedback to these organizations. But for now, we're not, holding that against any organizations, considering we, within our department have not submitted letters to them. Ask about the list of board members. This is number of independent directors, so you can provide a comment there. Okay. We want to know, how many board meetings they have, and then we also want to know. Let me pull that up. Where did my application go? Oh, there it is. Okay. In the application, you can find the board demographics, which will actually be I think it's in this section. No, it's in a separate section, which we'll come back to that. But this section does ask about their competencies. So what's important when you're reviewing, the competency chart for board members is just that that at least some of these are filled in, and it's not the same person for each competency. So we want to make sure if someone has a board of 15 members, it's not the same person who has, repeat skills. We want to make sure, there's diversity within the board as far as skills, and, making sure that that's not just relying on one person. Okay. And next we have workforce. So we want to know the number of paid workforce, employees per organization, if there's unpaid workforce, and then what the demographics of the paid workforce is. And again, this is all, within the application itself. There are no attachments that have this information. And last, in the management and planning section is in regards to their strategic plan. So again, level 1 applicants do not have to submit a strategic plan. They might, but levels 2 and 3, they do submit for a strategic plan. So we want to make sure that you're reviewing that, taking a look and filling out the corresponding review section. Okay. Next, we have services and programs. Okay, so in there, we keep going in the application. Let's see. Okay, so we want to make sure that their mission statement aligns with Erie County cultural funding. So most, or I should say all, of the organizations have already been vetted to make sure that their organization is compliant with, what this funding, the purpose is for. Sometimes, on occasion, there might be an organization that changes their mission. So we want to make sure in the application it asks if there's any significant changes. This applicant has said there's no significant changes at this time. Okay, we ask how they measure their impacts and successes. That comes directly from this section, however, or from the application, but it is listed earlier in the application. Okay, so earlier under organizational information or organization information, it asks, how does your organization measure impacts and successes? Oops. Okay, so like I said, you might be doing a lot of flipping back and forth. Sometimes I find printing the application as well is very useful, because then you actually, can flip through much easier.
How many pages is it, the two applications?
It's like 19.
Yeah, they're pretty lengthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they fill them out online, it's about like 22 tabs.
If you have an iPad or a tablet, sometimes I've done that too, or just set that next to me.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Okay. So impacts and successes. Let's see. We asked them how their programming and services in 2026. Oh, actually, yes, in 2026 serves their mission and audience. Let's see.
So these terms, social justice, racial justice, those come from, that's how the zoo broke it down.
Mm-hmm.
Is that from the Erie County?
Yes, so we ask within the application,
Okay.
For examples. So this question has been in, for a couple of years now. I don't know if it was new last year or the year before, but I would say their responses should be more elaborate now. I think it's part of the application. It's part of, you know, what's being scored. We'd hope that it's, you know, if it was something that they weren't focused on, you know, years prior, that they are now, and can provide some examples. Yeah, so there's a lot of different examples too within the review sheet. There are, you know, some examples of what an organization could put for each of these. What I would do if I was filling out a review is copy and paste it in here as well, just so, you know, the information is there for when you're considering how to score this section, you know, it's all in one place. Okay. Okay, so one of the next larger sections is their programs table. So each of the organizations will fill this out. Sometimes it's, you know, a one-off program. Sometimes it's a year-long program. So we just ask that, you know, organizations list, you know, for instance, the zoo is put, you know, from July to August in 2025, that they had a summer camp and it was attended, you know, by 555 people. So really you can see, you know, how, you know, engaged, you know, the programs are, you know, how well attended the programs are, you know, and how often the programming is being offered by each organization. And so that can be, you know, responded to in this review sheet. Okay, and one of the, you know, large yellow cells for this section is gauging their impact. So that again is that part, you know, way back in the first tab. You know, we have, you know, this, you know, chart that kind of guides us to determine their impact. You know, if they're, you know, a county or regional organization with, you know, high attendance programming, you know, their, you know, audience members are generally pretty large. You know, I would say that, you know, with their programming and considered that they're a highly impactful organization.
I just wanted to say for this, so when this came in, I think that part of the reason that it happened was to give some of our smaller organizations more of a breadth of like understanding how their impact could be actually outsizing necessarily the size of the organization, because I don't know if for folks that have been here for a few years, somebody like the zoo has such a long-standing relationship with getting their applications in, with getting the funding. They are a level 3. The amount of money that they're getting is like provided to many of the other organizations similar to EACAB and our larger boards. So this was really trying to do a little bit of that writing and giving us an understanding for our smaller organizations how they may actually be having a huge impact that could be different than some of our larger organizations, but that we weren't necessarily able to see in some of the other questioning parts of the application. So I feel like this was really trying to assist with that, because I have found historically with the larger organizations who have more experience, who have more resources, etc., are the ones who are able to benefit from this application process. When you have smaller organizations who maybe don't have the same experience, don't have the same level of resources, they can fare worse in this sort of structured process.
Yeah, thank you for that. I should mention, like, when you're looking at these reviews, you know, we're trying to use an equitable lens, you know, making sure we understand, you know, the capacity of these organizations. You know, if it's a large organization who has a grant writer, who has, you know, staff who are permanent, you know, their application is going to look a lot different than, you know, a strictly volunteer organization, you know, who's much smaller, you know, but still has a high impact. Thanks, Pat.
Everybody's starting to go, but you should hear from your team lead too about how your team wants to operate. So,
Great.
I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we went through services and programs. The last main section is inclusion. So this gets into, you know, more of questions about the board demographics, making sure that it's reflective of, you know, their audience, making sure that it's reflective of, it's as diverse as it can be. So let me see. If we go back up to or demographics. Okay. So as this applicant has mentioned, you know, they have 22 members, or 22 board members, I should say. 8 are female, 14 are male. 1 is identified as Asian, 2 as Black and or African American, and 18 are white. So there's 1 characteristic that's not listed above. So in addition, that was added this year, was just providing more board information. So if, you know, that chart doesn't encompass absolutely everything that can diversify your board, so you want to make sure that you're taking a look at, you know, what information they're providing here as well. Something that I see a lot of organizations put in is age diversity, making sure that there's a range of ages on their board. Religious diversity, that's another one that we don't specifically ask about. If there's anything unique that you see, I'm just curious, you know, as you know, what additional information, you know, boards can put. So if there's anything unique that you see and you want to let me know, that would be great. So for this organization specifically, so they're, you know, you can put in exactly what they put in their application. And then in these yellow cells, it says in terms of sex and gender. So their breakdown of, you know, 8 female and 14 male, obviously it's heavier on the male side. But I would say it's adequate for a board. You know, we see, you know, some organizations that are all one gender, and we want to make sure that that's indicated in here. So in terms of race and ethnicities, again, you know, taking a look at, you know, this organization, you know, represents, you know, all of Erie County, really. I mean, it's a national and international organization as well, just in terms of, you know, visitorship. So you want to make sure that that's reflected on the board as well. I would say you know, what was disclosed as being primarily white is something that would need work. And then there's also a section to assess their additional diversity that's included. You know, some organizations I see don't add, you know, anything in there at all. So it's nice to see what, you know, when organizations do have something listed. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can we go back to the diversity question?
Sure.
I remember last year I had been assigned an organization. I can't remember the name, but I think it was something where it was like an all male chorus group or something like that. So obviously everyone there was male. And so I didn't mark them down because it was sort of the nature of the work that they were doing. So I guess, do you have any, I don't know if really that's like an isolated group or there's other groups that have something that is a
Yes. Yeah. So we, especially it being, you know, cultural, a lot of these organizations, it's obviously understandable if there is, you know, a dominant culture that's, you know, representing a board, or, you know, race. In terms of the sex and gender, I know, you know, there's some that are primarily for, you know, it's a men's organization. I guess that can be open up, you know, to everybody too. Just as far as I would think that's okay. I know that it doesn't necessarily mean that just because it's a performing group that's encompassed with all men doesn't mean that their board that has to be all men. There is some subjectivity to that.
I think I might have actually put that in the comments. I can't understand. But, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So just making sure that.
And that's something, again, if you note in the comment section of this specific section, you know, we can include that, you know, if it's adequate, but, you know, with the caveat that, you know, perhaps they can reach out to, you know, more board members to diversify. That's just something that, at least if we're providing that to them, I think that's a good comment to include. Okay. So again, so you go through, you know, make sure that these yellow sections are filled out. The options for these are excellent, adequate, and needs work. And we ask about their, you know, workforce diversity. We ask about, especially in at least level 3s, their top compensated employees diversity. If they have any consultants, this again is unique to level 3s and what their diversity is. And then what their populations that are served and what their audience is. This is a narrative that's provided within their application. Under audience and community. And then another newer question, I believe last year it was added, was about accessibility. So really I would copy and paste this from their application right in here to kind of help you determine, you know, how is this organization approaching accessibility, you know, often with that equitable lens. You know, our larger organizations, you know, can really, you know, start thinking about it a lot more, providing a lot more inclusive spaces for the, you know, general public who may need it. It is great also when ADA compliance is considered, but it's also, you know, the bare minimum for accessibility.